In the heart of Abuja, where luxury and struggle exist side by side, there's a forgotten corner, a place for those who have fallen from grace. Inside a crumbling apartment, Tunde sits in darkness, his world reduced to 4 empty walls and a heavy heart. Once, he was a man of wealth and status, moving through life with confidence. Now, he sits on the cold floor, his fingers trembling as they hold an old wedding photo. He stares at the smiling faces, his and Adanna's, frozen in time, untouched by the betrayal that would come. A harsh buzz from his phone snaps him back to reality. He hesitates before looking. Final eviction notice. The last piece of his once glorious life is slipping away. Outside, the rain beats against the window, a steady rhythm of despair. He grips the photo tighter, his voice barely a whisper. What have I done? 5 years ago, Tunde's life was perfect. He lived in a beautiful house in one of Abuja's finest neighborhoods. The air always smelled of Adanna's cooking, and the warmth of her love filled every corner. She was more than a wife. She was his rock, his biggest supporter. When he started his business with nothing but a dream, she was there, encouraging him, believing in him even when he doubted himself. She stayed up late with him, helped with paperwork, and never once complained when money was tight in the early days. As the business grew, so did their life together. They went from a small rented apartment to a grand home. Expensive suits replaced his old shirts, and luxury cars now sat in their driveway. But through it all, Adanna remained the same, kind, patient, and loving. No matter how busy Tunde got, she always had time for him, always made sure he ate before rushing off to another meeting. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a high-class business event, filled with Abuja's richest and most powerful people. The room sparkled with chandeliers, the air thick with expensive perfume and laughter. That's when he saw her, Zuri, young, breathtakingly beautiful, and full of energy. Her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, something inside him shifted. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm lightly as she spoke. She made him feel young, exciting, wanted in a way he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, he looked at Adanna, his wife, the woman who had given him everything, and felt something dangerous. Comparison. Tunde couldn't stop thinking about Zuri. Her laughter still echoed in his mind. Her perfume lingered in his thoughts. She was young, vibrant, and full of life. Every time she looked at him, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Excitement, a spark. At first, he convinced himself it was nothing, just a passing attraction. He had a loving wife at home, a woman who had stood by him through thick and thin. But the more he thought about it, the more he noticed things he never paid attention to before. Adanna's hair wasn't as neatly styled as Zuri's. She no longer wore makeup like she used to. Her dresses were simple, practical, not the tight, fashionable outfits Zuri wore. The next time he saw Zuri at a networking event, she smiled as if she had been waiting for him. "You again," she teased, touching his arm playfully. "I hope you don't mind me stealing your attention tonight." Tunde chuckled, feeling a rush of energy. It had been years since someone had flirted with him like this. Zuri listened to him, laughed at all his jokes, and complimented his success. "A man like you deserves to enjoy life," she said, leaning in slightly. "You work too hard." That night, Tunde came home late. Adanna was waiting for him at the dining table, a warm meal in front of her. "You missed dinner," she said softly. "I had a meeting," he replied, barely looking at her. She didn't push, didn't question. She only smiled tiredly and said, "I kept your food warm." But Tunde didn't feel warmth. He felt something else, guilt, and strangely, annoyance. He wasn't sure why. Days turned into weeks, and Zuri made sure to stay in his orbit. She sent him playful messages, called him just to check in. He started enjoying their conversations more than he should have. He found himself comparing Adanna to her more and more. Zuri was exciting, spontaneous. Adanna was predictable, steady. Zuri was full of compliments, always boosting his ego. Adanna was practical, reminding him of responsibilities. His friends noticed the change before he did. One evening, as they sat at their usual lounge sipping drinks, his closest friend, Kola, leaned in and said, "Tunde, be careful." "Careful of what?" "That girl Zuri. We all see how she looks at you, and we see how you look at her." Tunde laughed, shaking his head. "It's nothing, just harmless fun." "Nothing about a woman like that is harmless," Kola said, his tone serious. "She only wants your money, your status. Adanna, she loves you. Don't throw that away." Tunde brushed off the warning, but the words lingered. Deep down, he knew Kola was right. Adanna had been with him when he had nothing. She never asked for more than his love, but something inside him had changed. He couldn't stop craving the rush he felt with Zuri. At home, things began to shift. He no longer noticed the little things Adanna did, the way she placed his slippers by the door, how she ironed his shirts perfectly, how she always made sure he had a hot meal after a long day. Instead, he started seeing flaws. The way she spoke about household expenses irritated him. The way she asked about his day felt like nagging. The way she reached for his hand in bed made him feel trapped. He started working late more often, or at least, that's what he told Adanna. The truth was, he was spending more time with Zuri. Expensive dinners, late-night drives, whispered conversations that made him feel young and alive. He told himself it was harmless, just a friendship, but deep down, he knew. He was slipping away from the woman who had given him everything. Adanna felt it too. She noticed the way he avoided her gaze, the way his kisses became brief, almost forced. She saw how he started dressing differently, how he suddenly cared about cologne and gym sessions. She saw the distance growing, but she didn't know how to stop it. She stayed silent, hoping it was just a phase, hoping he would wake up and realize what he had. But Tunde wasn't looking back. He was too lost in the thrill of something new, too blinded by the illusion of excitement, and he had no idea that the price of his choices was coming for him, faster than he could ever imagine. Tunde had made up his mind. The excitement he felt around Zuri had become an addiction, something he couldn't ignore anymore. Every moment with her felt new, thrilling, like he was living in a way he had never lived before. He started seeing Adanna as the past, a part of his life that no longer fit the man he was becoming. One evening, Adanna set the table for dinner, just like she always did. She had prepared his favorite meal, jollof rice with grilled chicken. The scent filled the house, a familiar warmth, a reminder of all the love she poured into their home. But Tunde barely noticed. He sat across from her, arms crossed, his mind elsewhere. "Is something wrong?" Adanna finally asked, sensing the distance that had grown too wide to ignore. Tunde sighed and leaned back in his chair. He avoided her eyes, staring at the food instead. "Adanna, I think we need to talk." She put down her spoon, her heart pounding. She had felt this coming, but she had prayed it wouldn't happen. Talk about what? He hesitated for a moment, but then the words came out, cold and sharp. "You're not the woman I married." Adanna's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Tunde pushed his plate away, as if the meal she had lovingly prepared suddenly disgusted him. "I need more, Adanna. More excitement, more passion. I feel stuck. Our marriage feels lifeless." Tears welled up in Adanna's eyes. She had given everything to this man. She had stood by him when he was struggling, supported his dreams, sacrificed her own wants to build a life together. "Tunde, we can fix this. We can try." He shook his head. I've already made my decision. I'm leaving." The words hit her like a knife to the chest. "For her?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tunde didn't answer, but the silence spoke louder than any words could. That night, he packed his bags. Adanna stood by the bedroom door, watching in disbelief as he threw shirts and shoes into a suitcase. "Please don't do this," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Think about everything we've built together." But Tunde had convinced himself that he deserved more, that he had outgrown her. Without another word, he walked past her, out of the house they had built together, out of the life they had shared. The next morning, divorce papers arrived. Adanna stared at them, her hands trembling. It felt so unreal. Just a few months ago, they were laughing together, making plans for the future. Now, she was being erased from his life, like she never mattered. With a shattered heart, she signed the papers. Meanwhile, Tunde stepped into a new world, a world that felt like a dream. Zuri welcomed him with open arms, her smile full of promises. "Now, we can really start living," she whispered as she wrapped her arms around his neck. Their life together was a whirlwind of luxury, expensive dinners in the finest restaurants, weekend trips to Dubai, designer clothes, flashy parties with a bourgeois elite. Tunde felt unstoppable, like he had finally broken free from the dull, predictable life he had left behind. Zuri showered him with attention, always telling him how lucky she was to be with a man like him. She made him feel important, powerful. Every night was filled with laughter, music, and expensive champagne. But beneath all the glamour, something was missing. Tunde couldn't quite place it, but every now and then, in the quiet moments, when the music stopped and the lights dimmed, he felt a strange emptiness, a feeling he couldn't explain. but he pushed it away. He had chosen this life, and he was determined to enjoy it. After all, this was what he wanted. This was the excitement he had left everything behind for, wasn't it? At first, life with Zuri felt like a dream. Every day was a new adventure. Luxury dinners, private beach resorts, shopping sprees at the most expensive boutiques in Lagos. Tunde felt like a king, with a beautiful young woman on his arm, making every man envy him. Zuri showered him with affection, always laughing at his jokes, always telling him how amazing he was. This is the life, Tunde told himself, as they sipped champagne on the rooftop of a 5-star hotel. He had no regrets, or at least, that's what he kept telling himself. But slowly, the cracks in the perfect illusion began to show. One evening, after a long day at work, Tunde came home to find the apartment in a mess, clothes scattered everywhere, dirty dishes piled in the sink. Zuri sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely unbothered. "Zuri, can you at least clean up a little?" he asked, trying to keep his frustration in check. She barely looked up. "I'm not your maid, babe. If you want the place clean, hire someone." Tunde was taken aback. Adanna had always kept their home spotless, making sure everything was in order. She did it not because she had to, but because she cared. But Zuri, she didn't seem to care at all. Still, he brushed it off. "She's young," he told himself. "She just needs time." But time only made things worse. Zuri's spending habits became uncontrollable. Every week, she demanded new designer dresses, expensive jewelry, and exotic vacations. "Babe, I need the new Chanel bag," she said one afternoon, pouting as she showed him a picture on her phone. "Didn't I just buy you one last week?" She rolled her eyes. "That was last week. I need this one now." Tunde sighed, but he paid for it anyway. He kept telling himself that making her happy was worth it, but deep down, he was starting to feel like nothing would ever be enough for her. Then came the parties. At first, they were exciting. Nights filled with loud music, expensive drinks, and endless fun. But Tunde soon realized that these weren't the kind of parties where people celebrated real success. These were parties filled with people who only cared about money, about showing off, about who had the most expensive watch or the flashiest car. And Zuri fit right in. She became the center of attention, dancing with strangers, laughing a little too much at other men's jokes. Tunde tried to ignore it, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing. She was slipping away. One night, at an exclusive event, he watched as Zuri leaned in close to a wealthy businessman, whispering something in his ear. The man laughed, placing a hand on her waist. Tunde felt his blood boil. After the party, he confronted her. "Why were you all over that guy?" Zuri scoffed. "Oh, relax, Tunde. We were just talking." "That's not what it looked like." She sighed, annoyed. "Maybe you should stop being so insecure." Tunde stared at her, realizing something for the first time. She didn't respect him. To her, he was just a provider, a man who paid for her lifestyle. And now, even that wasn't enough. The next week, she disappeared for 2 days. No calls, no texts. When she finally returned, she didn't even bother giving an explanation. "I was with friends," she said casually, tossing her bag onto the couch. Tunde felt sick. He had left a loyal, loving wife for this. He had thrown away years of real love for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a bank account. But the worst was yet to come. One evening, he came home to an empty apartment. The closet was half empty, Zuri's belongings gone. On the bed lay a note in her perfect handwriting. "I can't be with a broke man. Goodbye." Tunde sank onto the bed, staring at the words. His hands trembled, his heart pounded. It was over, and for the first time, he realized he had lost everything. Tunde had always believed he was untouchable. His business had been booming for years, and money flowed like a river. But life has a way of humbling even the most powerful. It started with a single bad deal. A major investment project in Lagos collapsed due to legal issues, and Tunde lost millions overnight. "It's just a small setback," he told himself. But then, his biggest investor, a man who had always promised loyalty, suddenly pulled out. "It's nothing personal, Tunde," the investor had said over the phone. "I just can't afford to take risks right now." Tunde felt the first wave of panic. Risks? His company had been a gold mine. But before he could recover, more cracks started appearing. Suppliers started demanding payments up front. Clients delayed their payments. Profits shrank. The stress of keeping his empire afloat became unbearable. Through it all, Zuri remained unchanged. She continued her extravagant lifestyle, acting as if nothing had happened. "Babe, Can we go to Dubai next weekend? She asked one evening, scrolling through luxury vacation packages on her phone. Tunde sighed, rubbing his temples. Zuri, things aren't great right now. We need to slow down on spending, she frowned. You're joking, right? You always say that. But we still have money. No, we don't, he snapped. Not like before. Zuri rolled her eyes. Then find more. You're a businessman, aren't you? That was the moment Tunde saw the truth. She didn't love him. She loved what he could provide. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure mounted. Creditors started calling. His employees whispered behind his back, sensing the downfall. Friends who once surrounded him at parties suddenly became too busy to pick up his calls. Then came the final blow. One evening, Tunde returned home after a brutal day at work, his mind racing with thoughts of bankruptcy. But the house was silent. Too silent. He walked into the bedroom, and his heart stopped. Zuri's belongings were gone. On the bed, a single note lay waiting for him. I can't be with a broke man. Goodbye. Tunde stared at the words, his hands shaking. His legs gave out, and he sank onto the bed, staring at the empty room. The same room that had once been filled with laughter, passion, and the illusion of happiness. Now, there was nothing. And in that hollow silence, the truth finally hit him. He had traded real love for an illusion, and in the end, he was left with nothing but regret. Tunde had spent months drowning in regret. His once glorious life had crumbled, and the loneliness was unbearable. Every day felt the same, empty, meaningless, and filled with memories he wished he could erase. One evening, as he sat in his tiny one-room apartment, he mindlessly flipped through TV channels. Then, something made him freeze. A familiar face appeared on the screen. Adanna. She looked radiant, more beautiful than he had ever seen her. She wore a classy navy blue dress, her natural beauty glowing under the studio lights. The interviewer smiled warmly. Tonight, we have the honor of speaking with one of Nigeria's most successful fashion entrepreneurs, Adanna Okafor. Tunde's breath caught in his throat. Fashion entrepreneur? The screen shifted to images of a luxurious fashion boutique, then to a massive showroom in Lekki, Lagos. Expensive designs hung on racks, and elite clients browsed with admiration. How did you build such an empire in just a few years? The interviewer asked. Adanna smiled. I started small. After my divorce, I had nothing but my skills and determination, but I believed in myself. I worked day and night, and slowly, things started changing. Tunde felt his stomach twist. After everything he had done to her, after he had thrown her away like she was nothing, she had risen stronger, more successful than he ever imagined. And now, the interviewer continued, your brand is known across Nigeria. Even international clients are taking notice. What's your secret? Adanna chuckled. Respect, hard work, and knowing my worth. Tunde swallowed hard. He wanted to turn off the TV, but he couldn't. He watched as the show ended, as Adanna confidently shook hands with the host, as the audience clapped for her. His hands clenched into fists. She was his blessing. She had stood by him when he was nothing, helped him build his empire. And what had he done? He had traded her for a fantasy, and now she had become everything he had once dreamed of, successful, powerful, admired. Without him, Tunde couldn't take it anymore. The regret was eating him alive. He had lost everything, his wealth, his so-called friends, and the woman who had once been his anchor. Watching Adanna on TV, seeing the life she had built without him, made him realize just how foolish he had been. He had to see her. He had to beg for forgiveness. The next morning, he put on his best shirt, though it was old and slightly wrinkled, and headed to her office in Lekki. The towering glass building reflected the bright Lagos sun, a symbol of her success. He hesitated at the entrance, his heart pounding. What if she refused to see him? But he had to try. Inside, the receptionist looked him over with mild curiosity. He no longer carried the aura of a powerful businessman. He looked like a man who had lost everything. I need to see Adanna, he said, his voice almost desperate. Do you have an appointment? She asked, already knowing the answer. Please, just tell her it's Tunde. The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone. After a short conversation, she nodded. You can go in. Tunde exhaled shakily and walked toward the large office at the end of the hallway. The moment he stepped inside, he felt overwhelmed. Adanna sat behind a grand desk, dressed in a white fitted blazer and gold jewelry that sparkled under the office lights. She looked elegant, confident, like a queen. Behind her, framed awards lined the wall, proof of her incredible achievements. She didn't look surprised to see him. In fact, she seemed indifferent. Tunde, she said, her voice calm. Why are you here? His throat tightened. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times, but now, standing before her, he felt like a small, broken man. He fell to his knees. Adanna, I was wrong, he whispered. I was a fool. I hurt you and I lost everything. Please, let's start over. Give me one more chance. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes, but it wasn't love. It wasn't longing. It was pity. She stood up slowly, walking around the desk until she was in front of him. He looked up at her, hoping, praying. She sighed. Tunde, I'm not the woman you left. His brows furrowed in confusion. I've grown, she continued, her voice firm but not unkind. But you stayed the same. You only came back because you lost everything. You didn't choose me when you had the chance. Adanna, please, he choked. I know I made mistakes, but I still love you. She smiled softly, but there was sadness in her eyes. Love isn't enough, Tunde. Respect, loyalty, commitment, those are what matter, and you threw them away. He wanted to argue, to promise he had changed, but deep down, he knew she was right. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, then stepped back. Goodbye, Tunde. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him on his knees, alone, broken, and forced to face the harshest truth of his life. He had lost her forever. Loyalty is priceless, and betrayal always comes with a cost. When you trade real love for temporary pleasure, karma makes sure you pay the price. And sometimes, the person you leave behind becomes everything you ever wanted, just without you. Regret hits hardest when it's too late. Don't let that be your story. If you enjoyed this, watch the next video on the screen. You won't want to miss it.